Okay, hello and welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about competition, efficiency, and market failure. We've actually thought about competition implicitly before. Thinking about the supply and demand model actually requires or sort of assumes perfect competition. Now, if we think directly about the market structure of perfect competition, a perfectly competitive market, it actually requires a number of assumptions. So those assumptions are many buyers and sellers, each that are small relative to the market and therefore unable to influence the price. They're all trading identical products. Everybody has full information about the prices available, which should be the same, and the quality, which should also be the same. And there's no barriers to entry or to exit. I'd like to also add that there's zero transaction costs, meaning that it's costless for buyers and sellers to find each other or for buyers to find other sellers and vice versa. As you're thinking about the model, you're like, wait a second, there's not a whole lot of markets that perfectly match perfect competition or even like closely match perfect competition. That's okay. The point of the model is actually like twofold. One is it's giving us sort of a nice benchmark to be able to analyze markets. It turns out perfect competition is going to be the situation, just like in the supply and demand model, that maximizes economic efficiency. The other thing that's really valuable about studying the perfect competition model is that it allows us to enumerate all these assumptions. And economics involves making assumptions. This is one place where we actually deliberately list out what those assumptions are and reflect on them. But it turns out anytime you're doing economic analysis, you're always invoking some of the assumptions from economics. If the model ends up not meeting reality or not making good predictions, you have to revise the model. And sometimes this means looking at some of those assumptions that need to be changed. And so this is actually kind of a good first step in guiding us in that direction. As I say here, competition, yeah, it's going to favor the most efficient producers. It'll direct output to the consumers that value it most highly. What this means is, if you have many buyers and sellers, and they're all going to sell at the same price, and somebody gets an advantage, well, they're going to be able to immediately sort of undercut the rest of the market, and then pretty soon everybody's going to copy them, and ultimately those that are left in the market have the same cost structure. What ends up happening is over time, the market is going to be left with whoever would be those advantageous sellers. And the sellers that are less efficient, those with higher costs, those that are further high on the supply curve, would have to leave the market. Then what happens with buyers? Well, remember the demand curve was representing valuations to buyers. And what competition is going to do is it's going to assume that the consumers with the highest valuation are going to be the ones who will get that good or service. Why? Because they're willing to outbid the other consumers or wait longer in line or whatever is the case. Economic efficiency is going to be maximized in the competitive model, right? So if we have perfect competition, we're going to maximize efficiency. The basic idea is that, well, just as Adam Smith wrote in Wealth of Nations in 1776, you've got a collection of individuals, everyone seeking out their own interest. And when they do this, they respond to the price mechanism. And as they're doing what's in their interest, this ultimately ends up being what's in the interest of society more generally, because they're producing exactly when the benefits of producing exceed the costs, and they're consuming exactly when the benefits of doing so exceed the costs. And in the aggregate, this maximizes economic efficiency, economic surplus, the difference between the valuation to buyers and valuation to sellers. Now, if you're paying attention carefully, you recognize I said, wait a second, there's not many markets that look like they're perfectly competitive, which means there's not many markets that perfectly are efficient, are there? Matter of fact, it turns out, one in particular, the market for medical services and healthcare is actually plagued by all the causes of market failure. What's market failure? Well, market failure is when the market, left to its own devices, fails to allocate efficiently. Market failure is exactly what happens when the outcome that happens in the market is not efficient, when economic surplus is not maximized. There's three main causes. If there's market power, this means if you actually have a buyer or seller that actually is able to influence the price, such as a monopoly. A monopoly seller is a seller of a single product, or a monopsony. A monopsony buyer is a single buyer of a product. In the case where you'd have like a single payer health insurance health system, a single payer health system would involve a monopsony buyer, a single buyer. Asymmetric information refers to a situation where buyers and sellers have an imbalance of information. One party to the transaction has better information than the others. That's actually a big problem in insurance markets, where buyers of insurance often have a lot better information about their inherent riskiness than does the insurance company selling the policy. And then externalities. Externalities refers to bystander effects. the effect that might extend beyond the individual benefits and costs for those who are parties to the transaction sometimes can spill over to other people, such as in the case of smoking. So if you smoke, well, there's a benefit and a cost to the individual smoker themselves. There's also an external effect, secondhand smoke, which then affects a bystander. Interestingly, for an externality to be present, you've got to have a bystander. No bystander, no externality. Anyway, the basic idea is that any of these three things is enough to confound and confuse the price signal, to make the market not allocate efficiently. And unfortunately, when it comes to our analysis of the medical system, of healthcare, turns out all three of these causes of market failure are indeed present to one degree or another in the area of healthcare.